Have you ever thought about what it's like to live through the end of an era? I mean, to see a world that felt perfect, eternal, and divinely ordered just come crashing down? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're diving into the dramatic collapse of the medieval world.
If you are not ready today, how will you be ready tomorrow? You know, this quote, it really gets to the heart of the anxiety that was gripping the late Middle Ages. The old certainties were just melting away. And this question, this deep, nagging question of spiritual readiness in a world full of chaos and death, it was on everyone's mind.
So, let's just set the stage for a second. The 13th century, this was the absolute peak of medieval civilization. Think of it like this giant stable pyramid. You had the Pope at the very top, the spiritual head of everything, and right there with him, the Holy Roman Emperor, the worldly leader. And below them, a totally unified society, all bound together by one shared Christian faith. I mean, from the outside, this thing looked like it was built to last forever.
So what on earth went so horribly wrong? Seriously, how did this grand structure, this thing that seems so completely stable, fall apart in what was, historically speaking, a blink of an eye? Let's start digging into the cracks that brought the whole thing down.
You know, the first crack in the foundation, it didn't come from some invading army or religious rebellion. Nope, it came from the inside. A new, powerful force was starting to rise up, the idea of the nation, led by kings who were getting pretty tired of being second fiddle to the Pope.
For centuries, it was simple. The Pope's spiritual authority was the ultimate trump card. But a new power was on the rise. Kings were starting to see their realms, France, England, not just as little pieces of Christendom, but as their kingdoms. They wanted total control inside their borders, and that, crucially, included the church's massive wealth and land. A collision was pretty much inevitable.
And that collision? Well, it came down to two incredibly stubborn, incredibly powerful men. On one side, you've got King Philip IV of France, who was dead set on being the absolute master of his kingdom. And on the other, Pope Boniface VIII, who was, let's be honest, one of the proudest and most power-hungry popes in history. This was never going to be just some political squabble. This was a fight for who really ran the world.
Just look at this timeline. It shows how incredibly fast the old world crumbled. In 1300, Pope Boniface is literally on the top of the world. 2 years later, he doubles down, declaring he has absolute power over all kings. But then, just 1 year after that, he's physically assaulted and kidnapped by the French king's men. The illusion of untouchable power, gone, shattered. A king had laid hands on God's supposed representative on earth, and he got away with it. And it wasn't long after that the entire papacy was packed up and moved to Avignon, basically becoming a puppet of the French king. So after that political earthquake, a second, even more terrifying blow hit Christendom. And this one didn't come from a king's ambition. It came from an invisible, microscopic killer that was about to change absolutely everything.
The Black Death. In just a handful of years, it wiped out at least 1/3 of the entire population of Europe. I mean, just stop and think about that. 1 out of every 3 people you knew, your family, your friends, your neighbors, just gone.
And the plague's impact wasn't just measured in bodies. It absolutely shattered society itself. Economies completely collapsed. That core belief in a just and ordered world, watched over by a benevolent God, broken. People were asking, how could God possibly let this happen? And with faith shaken, superstition and a morbid obsession with death just exploded. And in that desperation to find someone to blame, many people turned their fear into raw hatred, falsely accusing Jewish communities of poisoning wells, which led to just horrific massacres.
All right, so you've got a papacy that's been humbled by kings and a society completely traumatized by plague. What could possibly make things worse? Well, the church, the one institution that was supposed to be the bedrock of stability and comfort, decided to tear itself apart from the inside. This implosion became known as the Great Western Schism, and honestly, you couldn't make this up. After the popes finally came back to Rome, the cardinals elected a new guy. Then, they almost immediately changed their minds, declared their own election was invalid, and elected a second pope, who then ran right back to Avignon. All of a sudden, Christendom had 2 men, both claiming to be the one and only vicar of Christ on earth. And surprise, surprise, the battle lines for who supported which pope perfectly mirrored the political conflicts of the time. France and its allies, they backed the pope in Avignon, of course. Their mortal enemy, England, and its allies, they backed the pope in Rome.
This wasn't some high-minded theological debate. This was the 100 Years' War just fought with spiritual weapons. The dream of a united Christendom was officially dead.
For nearly 40 years, this went on. You had two popes, each one excommunicating the other and anyone who followed him. So half of Europe was officially damned to hell by one pope, and the other half was damned by the other. Can you imagine being a regular person just trying to save your soul? Who are you supposed to believe? The damage to the church's credibility was just catastrophic. It was permanent.
So, the Pope's political power, broken. The psychological certainty of the medieval world, shattered. And the spiritual unity of the Church, a total joke. All that was left was for one final symbolic event to bring the curtain down on the entire age.
And that event was the fall of Constantinople. This was the last living remnant of the Roman Empire. The city had stood for over 1,000 years as the great Christian capital of the East. But by 1453, it was all alone, friendless, and completely surrounded. After a desperate, heroic siege, the massive new Ottoman cannons finally blasted through those ancient walls, and the city fell.
The fall of Constantinople was so much more than just a military defeat. It was the symbolic death of an idea. That dream of a universal, eternal Christian Roman Empire, the very idea that had defined the medieval world for 1,000 years, was finally, officially over.
So, the perfect ordered world of the 13th century, it had been taken apart piece by painful piece, first by kings, then by plague, and finally by the church itself. The old certainties were gone for good, and the question left hanging over all those ruins was a huge one. What new world and what new ideas would rise from the ashes?